What is the most disturbing thing to know? I work as an anesthesiologist. I've put people to sleep in an emergency situation knowing that they will almost certainly not survive the surgery. These are generally situations where without surgery the patient will not survive, but even with surgery the chances of survival are still small. In most of these instances the patients are too obtunded or aren't conscious enough to be aware of the gravity of their situation, but in a number of instances the patients have been conscious, talking although clearly anxious. I try to reassure and tell the person that we won't leave their side, that we will take care of them, and that they will be fine. It kind of f's me up a bit to say this to someone, but I always include the last part because I just don't see the point in telling them the truth. I had one guy tell me he felt like he wasn't going to make it. I told him he would make it, but knew he wasn't going to. I put him to sleep knowing that the last human face he would see before he died was mine as he stared up at me as I held an oxygen mask over his mouth and nose. I'd consider myself quite a resilient person, but knowing this stuff is a bit of a load to carry around. I worked as a palliative carer for about 3 years. I looked after terminally ill people who had chosen to die at home after being discharged from hospital. After a while, you learn some telltale signs that people are deteriorating. After a bit longer, you start to learn how long people generally have left, even down to a few hours. I always went with honesty. I felt it was my job to support the patients' families as well as the patients. So if they asked how long I thought they had left, I would answer honestly, obviously with the disclaimer that I wasn't a doctor and I could only base it on my previous experiences. The wife of one of my patients told me that their children, adults, were visiting the following weekend to say their goodbyes. I had to decide carefully on what to say next, but I ultimately chose to recommend that they visit the following day at the latest. I regretted saying it because she was devastated. She took my advice and her husband passed away peacefully 48 hours later after seeing his kids. I'm glad I did it, but upsetting that lady was absolutely gut-wrenching. Some people didn't want to know, and it was their right not to know. That was the worst. In those cases, you had to not say anything. Sometimes they'd say see you tomorrow, and I had to reply, yes, have a good night and I'll see you in the morning, knowing full well that they were going to pass in the night. And for people asking, it is a very difficult but rewarding job. I'm no longer a carer, but I often think about whether I would be able to do it again. I've had one question asked a lot in the replies, so I'll answer it here. Death, like life, is different for everybody. Certain conditions will cause the body to deteriorate in different ways. I'm going to spoiler this next bit because it might be too much for some to read. COPD was a common condition I saw that was a gradual decline until the patient could no longer breathe and the oxygen just wasn't able to get in anymore. Heart failure was similar, a very drawn out process. I cared for a lot of cancer patients, some younger than my parents, which was quite distressing. What tended to happen was the symptoms they already presented would worsen beyond the point that their medication could alleviate it. They would lose energy, ultimately being bedbound. The biggest giveaway was when they no longer wanted to drink water. That was usually a 72-hour warning. When they were very close, their skin would start to mottle and go pink/purple. I'm not 100% sure why it happened, but I think it was because the heart was struggling to get the blood around, and it would settle. However, generally you could just tell that the person you've been seeing for days, weeks, months or even years just wasn't the same as they were a few days before. Changes could be gradual or sudden. I went to work with the philosophy that death comes for everybody. If it were me being cared for, then I would want to be cared for in a certain way, the way I tried to care for everybody whose homes I entered. If we see a life-threatening meteor is going to strike us in a few years, we probably, at least at the moment, couldn't do anything about it. They've had training simulations with this exact scenario, and they only got it right like 10% of the time. They need more like 10 years to reliably and consistently stop it. We very likely would never see it coming. We only see 9 objects in space with relatively high reflective properties. I see comets and the like are visible only because they reflect sunlight so well. Imagine an asteroid made of basalt covered in graphite dust, pitch black, Our only shot of seeing it is if it has some kind of thermal signature and we happen to have an instrument sensitive enough to catch it pointed directly at it. Given the vastness of space, the latter will very likely not happen. One day, you could wake up to an unholy roaring and the sky on fire, and then, if you're lucky, you will be instantly vaporized. If not, earthquakes, tsunamis, wildfires, global winter, starvation, cannibal bandits, or complete ecological collapse will kill you more slowly as the planet itself shudders. A Missouri court famously handled the case of Celia, a slave who killed her owner in 1855 while fighting a sexual assault. In such situations, state law considered any woman to be acting in self-defense. However, the court determined that Celia was not a woman in the sense of the law. She was a slave, and her owner had complete control over her. She was given the death penalty by the court since she was pregnant. However, her execution was postponed until the child was born so as not to deprive her owner's successors of their property rights. For another disturbing piece of history, look up the 1918 lynching of Mary Turner in Georgia. A cardiac tamponade is when your heart literally chokes itself to death. If a blood vessel inside the pericardium leaks, a tough membrane protecting the heart's pumping, will force blood into the space between itself and the pericardium. As the space fills, the heart can't pump anymore due to a lack of space. It literally drowns in your own blood. Probably better to say it's crushed to death. Since the heart doesn't breathe, it can't drown. But since it pumps, it can be crushed, so it can't fill back up again. Fun fact, if the pericardium fills with fluid slowly, for instance weeks, or can stretch and hold up to 2 liters without many symptoms, if it fills fast, as little as 200 milliliters can kill you. The Nutty Putty cave accident. Google for full disturbing details / a map of the cave. But basically a guy got stuck caving in a very narrow unmapped tunnel, upside down. They could not get him out, but almost did. One of the rescuers made eye contact with him apparently, but then their pulley system broke and he fell further down. Unfortunately, he ended up dying of cardiac arrest from being upside down for so long, and they couldn't get him out / never retrieved the body because it was too dangerous for rescuers. Truly so disturbing. I've thought about it probably once a week since I found out about it a few months ago. Edit. Even more disturbing now that someone gave this a wholesome award. Sarin gas is one of the worst ways to kill another human being, and we have seen multiple instances where it has been used on innocent people. Whether relaxed or contracting, your muscles need certain signals in order to function. When you flex a muscle, a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine floods the muscle cells, telling them to contract. Your brain eventually tells the muscles to stop contracting, and so that acetylcholine has to be removed. This is done with acetylcholinesterase, an enzyme which breaks it down and allows your muscles to relax. This happens for every movement of every muscle in your body, whether you're flexing your bicep or blinking. Every beat of your heart, sarin kills because it bonds with acetylcholinesterase, completely changing its structure and rendering the enzyme useless. This means your muscles never relax. They flex harder and harder and harder. Your entire body can cramp, your pupils, everything. The burning gets worse and worse and the pain is unbearable. If enough of it enters the bloodstream, usually via skin, it will lock up your diaphragm and you will asphyxiate. It kills quickly, but I struggle to imagine too many things that would be worse than dying from cramps in muscles you didn't even realize existed. It's not the worst weapon humans have at their disposal, as if you survive a sarin attack you're likely to make a full recovery, as it doesn't scar lung tissue like other chemical weapons. That being said, it's still classified as a weapon of mass destruction and is supposed to be banned. Polar bears are the only bear species that actively hunt and kill humans for food. There's a rhyme that everyone loving where bears live needs to know, and why the rhyme is so important. If it's brown, lie down. Brown or grizzly bears will leave you alone if you play dead. Climbing up a tall tree works with adult brown bears, since they can't climb trees. If it's black, fight back. Black bears will back off when they realize you're more of a threat than they realize. But do not climb a tree to escape. Both cubs and adult black bears can climb trees. If it's white, say goodnight. Polar bears are not only the largest bears, but they are ambush predators. If one manages to sneak up on you, you're as good as dead. The best you can do to escape is either run and drop your clothes, Fortunately for you, they have very short attention spans and they'll stop momentarily to sniff at your clothes, because it's not normal for their food to suddenly drop something like that, or start praying to whatever deity you believe or don't believe in. Generally speaking, if you do come across a bear, you never ever run away. Stand your ground, make yourself look big, and be loud. If the bear stands on its hind legs, it's just checking you out. It's curious and has likely never seen a human before. The best option is to back away slowly while maintaining eye contact, still being loud. If the bear decides to charge, use an air horn or bear spray, which will likely cause to run off. I were to if I just got maced. However, as a last resort, use a gun or other weapon if it becomes aggressive or starts mauling.